We'll get started. The panel is called How to Make Money Making Videos. Don't worry, Google autocorrect got me. Nice. So we're just gonna watch this video. No, but seriously though, how to make money making videos. Wait, what did we call it? We didn't call it that. That's a very bad title, Freddie. Videos for a living. Okay. When I came up with that title, I need to back it up because the for a living part of it is where this gets tricky. Because I think that, I think just to give a little bit of a history lesson, I think it's important to note that, good God, okay, here we go. It's important to note that YouTube in 2010, when I started, in fact, let's go back to the Wayback Machine. So I started YouTube, had a proper channel 2010, but we started YouTube proper like March 2010. Was on YouTube and making videos like while I was in college before that. So if we take a look, let's just back up here and let's just take a look at the history of the channel. Back in 2007 was when I created this channel. Any reasonable person would know that the Wayback Machine is not an indicator of any sort of fan base or actual usage, but it's just when the spider comes back and crawls it. So, yeah. Cool. 2007. YouTube looked a lot different. And I think that when we first started 2010, the pilot program just, oh my goodness, here we go. This is literally, I was like, check out my website. I got Blogspot. People were posting bulletins. One of the first things we put up was this Guitar Hero video, which even then was getting a lot of people. Hey guys, newsflash, Guitar Hero was super popular for a while. However, when we first started, there was no, money wasn't a thing. It had just started to become a thing. And in 2010, I think that the partner program, the way that YouTube had set up to be able for you to ad share had just started. You could, at that time, apply for it. You could get ads on your thing. And I have to say that everybody that I knew at that time, and people who eventually went on to have fairly large channels of repute who have gone on to make a living doing this, everybody's attitude was, holy crap, I can't believe we're getting paid for this at all. Like, it was insane. The idea that you could get any money just doing what you were doing, which was putting videos and putting it up. It was a time period where everybody who was in it not for the cash because there was no cash in the first place. So there was no expectation of cash. I think it's something that's very important to remember because I remember when Smosh first put up ads on their videos, people boycotted their channel. Their comments were like, you guys sold out. We're never watching your videos again. You guys are jerks. I can't believe you would abandon us, your fans, by putting ads on your videos. I somewhat snarkily tweeted that back in that time period, it was people were boycotting channels for putting ads up, and now people are boycotting YouTube for not putting ads up, I guess now it seems to be the attitude. It's important to remember because the expectation of money was never there. And I've noticed that in recent years, there seems to be an expectation of that. So, to get into it, right, like there was the adpocalypse on YouTube last year. A lot of advertisers were like, hey, we don't like it when when Coca-Cola advertisements show up next to neo-Nazi videos. That's not a good look for the Coca-Cola polar bear. We kind of not want to have that. And YouTube, in correcting it, had a lot, advertisers were dropping out, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of the conversation still continues even to now with the insane, let's be honest, crap that Logan Paul has done. And the people, and people were, in the debate of it, they're like, well, you guys, you need to punish just Logan for profiting off of dead bodies and suicide, and you can't affect the rest of the ecosystem at all. Because but what about everyone else? And there seems to be an implicit idea in there that people, if you put videos up, you should get money for it. And I think it's very important to disabuse yourself of that notion before you get started or before you even look into this. Because right now it feels a lot like, well, yeah, you make videos, you should be able to make a living off of this. But that's only been the case kind of relatively recently. And just because there are people doing that, you need to always remember that it doesn't mean that you will be able to do that. There is nothing that YouTube or Patreon or whoever owes anybody on that. There is no, like, you got to get that out of your head, because I'm noticing more and more people have that in their head. They're like, well, yeah, because the earliest generation of people were people who put this out there. They put out, hey, if you do what you want, if you can make the videos, you can make videos that you've always wanted to make, like, you know, here I am in college making dumb road trip videos and sweet action gunfight stuff, and I was able to make a living off of it, and they put that out there. And a lot of people, I think, took that as, well, if I do that, then I should be able to get the same thing too. It's like, well, no, not necessarily the case. That is the sort of hard truth and hard fact of making money online, is that nothing is guaranteed here, and it's always changing, right? So a lot of the stuff that I've figured out and that we learned was 2010 through 2015, which is 3 years ago, which might as well be 40 years ago if this was any other sort of medium, because stuff changes so quickly online. So the thing that I always kind of go for when I talk about what is going to work here as far as making things and sustaining in this is this Japanese concept for Iki Guy, which is meaning reason for being, which is, I think, very important, because if you don't have this, you're not really going to last as far as doing and following your passion. I think that this, by the way, applies to anything that you do as far as passion is concerned. First and foremost, it has to be something that you like doing, and ideally something that you're good at doing. And what this is basically, it's four things. It's what you love, what you're good at, what you can be paid for, which is very important, and what the world needs. And when I think about what the world needs, it's a little bit different in terms of how I think about that. Not in a sort of charitable sense, but in terms of maybe what is not out there, what is something that you can fill in for. So a lot of people love video games. Dang, they're good at it. Wait, I can get on Twitch and be paid for it, but there's a lot of people playing video games on Twitch. So maybe the what the world needs side of it, a little bit harder to fill out. Not to say, again, that you can't ever break that out. Every single situation where I've seen somebody attempt to make video online and to take advantage of the fact that there's something hot, there's something that's viral at the moment, has failed. And those people are no longer doing it. And not to say, again, that you can't have flash in the pan kind of moments where you're like, great, I'm going to make X for a while and I'm going to make a bunch of money off of it. But if that's what you care about, making a bunch of money off of quick hustles, this is probably not the thing for you. This is probably not the panel for you in that regard. For example, back in the day, there was a guy who, I won't name names, but back in the day there was a guy who was like, hey, YouTube just allowed us to change the thumbnails of our videos. I can change the thumbnail to whatever I want. Then he was like, well, every night Letterman does a monologue. I'll record myself doing a monologue on the same subject very poorly, and then change the thumbnail to a shot from the Letterman show. And then when I believe it's Dick Clark or Letterman's production company is going through YouTube issuing takedowns, they won't watch the video. Those guys are just sitting there looking at the thumbnails and be like, well, this guy clearly just re-uploaded Letterman's monologue from yesterday about this subject, and they'll take down my video. And then I'll tell my lawyer to tell them, hey, that was a fraudulent takedown, and get 10 grand in compensation for the fact that they fraudulently did it, otherwise I'll pursue legal action. And it worked. And it worked for like a few months. So he basically just sat there and just cranked out dumb videos of himself changing the thumbnail and taking advantage of the fact that people were not looking at the videos and issuing these and basically doing a legal hustle. For a while, if you guys remember on YouTube, there was a lot of people would say, hey, Eminem's got a new song out. YouTube's length of when you search for a song, it'll cut off at a certain point. So if I just name my song, Eminem, Lose Yourself, da, 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 and then put parody past the cutoff of when it shows up in search and use a thumbnail from that video, now all of a sudden people looking actually for that video is going to show up. People are going to show up on my thing. People are going to watch it. They hated doing that because they were making dumb parodies of stuff, but also they weren't able to sustain it. And eventually YouTube changed up their algorithm in terms of how they handled things, and they no longer were able to do anything with that. And there was nothing lasting from that. So it's very important, I think, to remember that whatever you want to be doing, you need to be thinking about sort of these four things. Because if you don't have that, you're going to have, again, there's plenty of people who do fantastic videos, and they love what they're doing, and it may be sort of filling a niche, but they're not going to get paid a ton for it, and that might be totally fine. I think there's a lot of people who do that, and I think that's totally good and totally fine, and I think that that's arguably the best stuff on YouTube is examples of that. Some of my favorite channels are examples of that. Primitive Technology now is a gigantic channel, right? This guy shows up on the front page of Reddit every single time. But when I look at how it started, so for those of you unfamiliar, Primitive Technology is a YouTube channel where a guy somewhere in the Australian outback basically makes these 10-minute long, 15-minute long videos where he sits there and there's no sound because there doesn't need to be sound. It's just this. It is, here he is making clay, and he does a lot of research in terms of what are actual primitive technology techniques, and then he goes ahead and he does it. So here he is. I'm just going to leave this running in the background because it's incredibly soothing. But you get to see this process, and it's like, this is something to me that is like perfect YouTube content. If someone went to the Discovery Channel and said, hey, we want to do a show doing this, like surviving in the wilderness and sort of making clay and stoves and burning wood and all that stuff, they would be like, cool, you need a host, you need to do infographics, they would TV it up and they would ruin it. Whereas this is literally 10 minutes, there's no narration. If you turn on the closed captioning, literally his only voice is if you turn on closed captioning, he explains kind of what he's doing in every step in the closed caption. But for most people, they're not even seeing this. This is it. If he was not making money off of this, and he's getting here now 4.5 million views, and the rubric, the metric for calculation is about $2.50 per as CPM. So you're looking at about $2,000, $2,500 per million. So by that approximate calculation, you're looking at about 10 G's on this video from a financial standpoint. We're going to be talking about numbers and stuff because I think it's important. So if he was not getting those kinds of views, I guarantee you he is going to be somewhere in the Australian outback doing this. And I think that that's really important, because if this was something where he was like, cool, I'm able to get all these views doing this and I'm going to keep doing this, and that's something that he wasn't actually passionate about, I don't think that they'd be able to sustain this channel. And I think that that's, again, one of the examples of what I consider like really, really good YouTube content. And coming in from a place that he would be doing this regardless of whether or not he was making boatloads of cash off of it. Again, every single situation I've seen where people are making boatloads of cash off something, I do not see as sustainable if they don't have any sort of passion for it. If they weren't going to be doing it for free in the first place, then you're not going to be able to hang on to it. So there he has made a pinch pot. He's fired a clay pinch pot. Fantastic. I will watch this. And by the way, the sound is great. It's just the sound of nature. It's very soothing. So, like, to me, this is an example of somebody who's doing something that works really well. And you have to ask yourself this before you get started from a monetary standpoint. You have to ask yourself, okay, what am I looking for? What am I aiming at? And the more you aim for, the harder it's going to be to actually work on this, right? So if you're saying, like, I want to be able to sustain myself, I want to make a full-time salary on what I'm doing, that's going to be a little bit harder than I want to have some pizza money. To give you reference, when we first started in 2010, I was in a situation where I was living in a loft in LA with Brandon, the guys from Corridor Digital. We were all 5 of us in a loft which cost $1,800 a month. So $1,800 divided amongst 5 people, and almost no utilities and stuff like that. So my rent was a few $100, right? That was what I was trying. That's when we first started. We were like, cool. If we can make rent and a little money for food, then we will consider ourselves happy and successful. That was the goal that we had sort of set for ourselves. Because again, at the time, you don't have any examples of people walking around YouTube money, all that stuff, right? So you have to ask yourself right away, like, okay, what is a sustainable amount of money that, if you want to do this for a living, that you can handle? And depending on where you live, depending on your cost of living, we have someone out here from California, we have some people out here from other sort of parts of the East Coast. Depending on where you live, that's going to be a different equation for you, right? A lot of the sort of educational stuff is that I think Hank Green's doing is up in Missoula, Montana. The cost of living up in Missoula, Montana is different than downtown Los Angeles, right? So that's going to be a factor for what you're doing. So you do need to sit down and be like, okay, how much can I reasonably expect to make? And if you want to, so we're going to talk right now about views basis only. So if off of a views basis, advertising basis only, you can basically apply an approximate calculation of about $2,000, $2,500 per 1 million views over the course of about 3 months. So if you put a video up, again, and I would even sit in Excel, that would model this out. If you put a video up and it gets 1 million views, you can expect $2,500 over the course of the next 3 months as a result of that. It doesn't come in all at once. It's staggered out. So again, but 1 million views is a lot, especially given the way a lot of this stuff goes. And I think that, you know, we have Patreon now as another way of doing this. But I think what's important to remember is that the various ways that you can make money off of doing a video are pretty shaky to begin with, right? So YouTube's advertising system is gigantic. I have a lot of sympathy, I think, for YouTube because they have essentially a really, really difficult problem to solve. And I think a lot of people are like, well, why don't they do just X or Y, sort of neglect to understand that the problem they have to solve has to be able to be solved with computers and automated. It cannot have a significant manual override kind of component to it because of the amount of labor it would take for someone to sit there and like manually review things is insane. And the amount of videos they get is more than anything any of us could even sort of conceive of. Like again, I think the latest statistic is something like every second, 48 hours of video are getting uploaded onto YouTube. So there's no way that this system is going to work from a personalized basis. It's going to be a big, unthinking, automated system. So when an advertiser says, by the way, this guy's really, really good at making fire just by rolling a stick. Like, you know, just watch this. Because he's been doing it for a while. Here's my point. If he didn't really like doing this, he wouldn't be this good at making fire with just his bare hands and a stick. He would at some point cut away, he would use a lighter, and it would come back and something would be lit already. No, look at this. He has calluses on his hands. So the point is, I will say that I went camping recently and I gave it a shot. A lot harder than it looks. So the first step is you get the spark going into a set of tinder, and then by blowing oxygen into it, you can get it to ignite. You sort of build it up step by step. Very cool. So the problem is all these systems are shaky, right? So the adpocalypse happened, and everyone's like, oh, all these small creators are losing money. They'll be unable to sustain themselves. That's unfortunately, I think, part of the game. And that's unfortunately part of the process, right? Recently, hold on 1 second here. Recently, there's been Patreon, right? So Patreon here is probably one of the first examples of here's a system where you can go direct to consumer. So does anybody have somebody they follow who's on Patreon? So shout it out. Lego bribes? Sorry, what? All right, you know what? That didn't work at all. One at a time. What did you shout? Plague of gripes. Lego bribes is not taken, by the way, so we can do that. So Plague of gripes. What does Plague of gripes do? Artist. So here's an example of somebody who, right, like, so the question of like when you look at YouTube and you're like, dang, 1 million views, $2,500, it's quite a bit. So this is here's something to keep in mind here, right? So he's making $2,500 a month. So again, this is the equivalent of having a channel that your videos are making 1 million views a month, right? Does he have a YouTube channel? Hold on a second here. Let's pull it up because I want to be able to look at this and show some good examples. Here we go. So just to go through his uploads and kind of just sort of get a general sense of where he's at, right? He has some things that will pop up every so often. You're looking at 2,800 views here, but for the most part, it looks like things kind of hover in the 20K, 30K view range, right? So what's cool about Patreon, right, is that you can do this math where you're like, cool, if he's making $2,500 a month off of 500 patrons, this is the equivalent of getting 1 million views by putting out a video once a month, right? That feels like a lot more attainable, right? To be able to get 500 people versus, say, 1 million clicks, sort of different, depending on the type of content you're doing, it's going to be either harder or easier to do that. But I think what's important to keep in mind is when you're dealing with this, you're asking yourself a different question, right? And which is where this comes back into play, which is, if you're doing something that's now on Patreon and you figure there's going to be a finite number of people out there who's willing necessarily to sit up and pony up for content, so their ancillary side things. And more importantly, I think you could probably infer any given person who's going to support someone on Patreon is not going to support 1,000 channels, for example, right? There's probably a physical limit where someone's like, cool, I'm supporting 3 or 4. Like, how many channels do you support on Patreon? Two, 3, 12. We have a whale in the middle of the ice here. But, right, you're saying 2 to 3, 2, 4, 5, somewhere in that range, right? So the problem is, okay, well, if you have something that is very similar to what this guy is doing, like, you're fighting essentially against him in order to get sort of that group of people, which is where I think it's important to think about here the what the world needs side of the equation. What is it that you can do that is, if not unique, has a unique spin on things? And I think that's important to remember, because there was, I think when I remember for the longest time people were like, well, Shay Carl is going to be the ultimate vlogger and no one is going to vlog after Shay, because like he's done it. He's does a daily vlog, which was unheard of when he was doing that, and that no one else can do that. And for the longest time, I think that everyone's like, I remember at VidCon, people were talking about, yeah, vlogging's not worth it anymore. The market's too saturated for vlogging. But again, what people forget is that that's not what people sign up for and what people are looking for. That was around the time that Jen Marble started making videos. And again, she blew up, and because essentially she was like, cool, here's a different take on what we understand and what we think about when we say vlogging. Here's a different way of looking at that. The Jake Pauls and the Logan Pauls of the world, in addition to being slightly different than what Shay Carl was bringing into the table, they were also attracting a different audience. One of the things that I think is really interesting, anybody listen to podcasts? Show of hands, who listens to podcasts? Pretty much, pretty solid 50% of the room or so. One of the really interesting things you'll notice is that anytime a YouTube person decides to like go do a podcast, they blow away the charts all of a sudden. Like there'll be, you'll sit there and be like, cool, This American Life, NPR, killing the podcast game as per usual. And then all of a sudden there will be some YouTuber podcast that will pop up and show up in the iTunes sort of top 10 charts. And one of the interesting things, looking into that, one of the interesting things about it is that it wasn't because it's not because those people are flipping all them Ira Glass fans and everyone's like, yo, have you heard about this podcast? I got to stop listening to This American Life and listen to these guys. It's they were bringing a completely different podcast audience to the table. They were bringing their fan base who weren't, maybe that might be the only podcast they're listening to. That might be the only podcast they're downloading. That gives you an idea of the relative scale of like podcasts, right? Is that the fact that like a single individual YouTuber can completely blow out one of the podcast charts or chart amongst sort of the heavy hitters in the podcast world says, okay, the podcast world is mostly coastal, from what I understand demographically, mostly coastal, mostly college-educated, people who probably drive a car or have a commute, right? Those are a bunch of sort of things that are generally podcast listeners are fall into that category. By bringing in a bunch of, say, teenagers or people who aren't any of those things but happen to be fans of that, they change up that equation. So if the question of what you're doing, if you can bring in a different audience, that's also a very powerful way of finding that, is that finding an audience that may not necessarily watch things in the first place. When we first started on YouTube, we told people what we were doing, people saw what we were doing, and they were like, oh, that's cool. But what about, and I remember very distinctly, this is again 2010, they're like, well, what about your female audience? I said, well, what do you mean? And going around the room, because we were having dinner with a bunch of these sort of YouTube creators, everybody was like, well, yeah, because YouTube is primarily female. I was like, why would you guys say that? Like, well, yeah, because all of our content, all of our demographics show a heavy female viewership. And they went around, they're like, yeah. So a guy like Mr. Guitar Man at that time, 80% female. A lot of these other guys like 80%, 85%, 90% female, 10% male. They're like, yeah, guys don't watch YouTube. I was like, yeah, but we watch YouTube though, right? Like, well, yeah, but guys don't watch YouTube. That was the prevailing knowledge at the time. But looking back at it, what the more specific thing was, guys didn't subscribe to the channels that were available at that time on YouTube. That's a different thing than saying just guys don't watch YouTube. They erroneously made the conclusion that, well, my audience base is mostly female, and therefore the whole thing of YouTube is mostly female. Which no, it's YouTube, like any other gigantic site's probably 50% male, 50% female. But what guys were watching was at the time sites like break.com. At the time it was sites like collegehumor.com. It was a different set of content. So when we started doing things and we were telling people, yeah, our stuff is doing like 95% male, people didn't believe us. They like literally like, no, log into your account, show us your demographics. I don't believe you that guys are watching your channel. Guys don't subscribe to things. And sure enough, we're like, no. What we were able to do at that time is, well, there wasn't a lot of that type of thing, that sort of type of, action, comedy, that sort of oriented sort of thing on YouTube, sort of visual effects heavy sort of thing. So we brought in a lot of our audience were a lot of people who were not necessarily subscribed to the existing group of people on YouTube. So I think that's a good lesson sort of to take away from it, which is, yeah, it doesn't really matter what you do, but it is important that you think about it from the perspective of who a potential viewer might be and where those viewers necessarily are. And I think that it's a lot harder than it used to be. I think that to give you an example, when we created sort of the first video, and walking around here today, this was one of the first videos that we did that like actually went viral in the sense that oh my gosh, sorry, skip. So this is one of the first videos that we did where it was a video that went and got spread around. To give you an understanding of it, this got posted on Kotaku.com, gaming blog, right? When it was posted on Kotaku, when we looked at the analytics, it received something in the neighborhood of 150 to 200,000 views as a result of that link on Kotaku in 2010. As the years went on, that number's only gone down, right? To the point where now a Kotaku mention on something might get to 5,000 to 6,000. So you're talking about 10% you're talking about like 20% of what it used to be. But it's a huge difference from where it was to where it is now, because the problem is how do you get people to see your stuff, right? Because the thing that we thought about a lot was, here's the problem. You have essentially two kinds of content that you're making. You have content that is serving sort of the audience that you have, that's like making them happy and showing them something that's a little more insular. And then you have stuff that's kind of like reaching out a little bit, trying to be a little more broad, trying to find a larger audience as a result of it. And more that act of trying to find other people is getting harder and harder to do. There's a lot of people now who are like, cool, I'm just going to do this on Facebook because Facebook has a much better sharing system within it. But by uploading to Facebook, you're basically living within the Facebook ecosystem, right? Twitter used to be a big part of us and putting our videos out and putting links on Twitter and having people tweet it. Now it's very little in terms of traffic that we get from Twitter, because each of these companies have a sort of built-in vested interest to keep people on their platform. So Facebook people do not like it when people go to Facebook and then click off-site to go to YouTube. YouTube likes you to stick here. So then knowing that, okay, here's what they're rewarding. They're rewarding videos that keep you on YouTube longer, which is why when they say, okay, what works right now? Longer vlogs. Because any given person who's going to sit down for a vlog, they might sit down for that whole thing. They're not going to just jump around and skip around. So they're sitting down and that audience that was watching vlogs are sitting down for 15 minutes at a time, 20 minutes at a time. So from the computer algorithm standpoint, they're looking at that and they're saying, cool, these people are sticking around here. They're also rewarding videos that cause you to do this, which is to go and look at another video and to pump around. Rest assured, and the reason why thumbnails are important is because any video that gets you to kind of be like, oh, this looks interesting, go here. Now you're spending more time on YouTube, right? And as you go around, you sort of figure out, okay, this is who's in our sort of ecosystem. It's these guys. It's Raka Raka. It's Corridor. It's apparently, I've actually never heard of Freaking Rad. Here's another group of people, right? So when you look at this and when you think about where your content can go, it's important to remember that whatever platform you're on, you need to play by the rules of that platform. And more importantly, that platform is going to care about you playing by those rules of that platform. So, for example, as we understand it, Facebook will, if they see a link in your text description to an offsite thing, they will actively keep that post from going around as much. They will show it to fewer people as a result of that. If they detect that you're shilling for another brand in the middle of your video, and they will detect that by listening to the audio and scanning for logos uploaded to their logo database, they will actively stop that video from going around. There's a lot of sort of things there where, again, you can sit here and we can get into that, and I'd love to get into that a little bit here when we get into question and answers, but if you're not fulfilling sort of this, it won't matter. Because if you're sitting here and your entire existence is occupied with, okay, we got to outsmart the YouTube algorithm and do this and this and this, and oh, we got to outsmart the Facebook algorithm. Unless that is the reason you get up in the morning and that like totally jives you, in which case, all power to you, you're not going to be able to sustain doing this for any degree of time. So we have about half an hour left, and we have enough people here that I like to get sort of let's get real intimate with it. And I think we can get into some examples much cleaner if we do some questions and we do some answers. So if anybody have any questions about YouTube in general, or starting a channel, or anything in that world, feel free to lobby it, and let's have a little discussion around the room here. I saw a hand all the way over there. Yep. So YouTube has, by the way, so he's talking about automatic demonetization of your videos and how that's affecting. And that's affecting a lot of people. So YouTube has a system built in for it. You're not going to like it, but this is what it is. It is, if your videos, they do have a system right now in place to kind of look through and be like, okay, is this fine or is this not? That takes time. So the current suggested guidelines on YouTube is this: upload it unlisted, and then wait. And then wait 24 hours. And then if there is a request for review, flag it for review, and it'll take another 3 to 6 hours after that. And then only then, when you're like, cool, it's working, it's fine, then put it up. So it's essentially, they're saying, you have to deal with our system. You have to put a 24-hour to 36-hour lag on your videos as you upload it. For people who are doing things that require you to be topical and on time, that's going to be harmful to you. For those of you like primitive technology guy who uploads maybe once a month, not as much of a problem, right? So that is the way that you, unfortunately, right, as much as annoying as that is, that's a result of the fact that there's a lot of people in that system, and there's a lot of problems with that system, and any given advertiser who's going to put an ad on the video, they're always going to err on the side of conservatism, of caution, rather than be like, well, maybe this is fine, let's just put it up anyway. They would much rather be like, we'd rather get a bunch of false positives and get it wrong, because that's safer for the health of the overall ad system, because that's going to let advertisers feel a little more at ease putting their things up by being more aggressive against things that might be potentially dangerous as far as putting ads alongside. They'd rather do that than deal with any, because even a single case of an ad executive of Coca-Cola seeing something pop up bad, you've just lost an entire company for even a single case, right? There's actually a very famous example of PopUp Ads, and why PopUp Ads happened was, wait, are you guys familiar with the story of PopUp Ads and why PopUp Ads exist? It's because Tripod, you remember Tripod.com? Who had Tripod.com? Who had a blog on Tripod.com? I'm not going to check that just in case. GeoCities and Tripod were in a fight for how to do free content and how to be able to pay for it. They're like, cool, we can do ads. So Tripod came up with an idea of putting ads on the top of every one of these free blogs that they were letting people have. They were giving a presentation at Ford, and they're like, well, look, people love Ford cars. Here's an example of a bunch of these fan pages of Ford automobiles that you can load into. And then for some reason, they were showing the site. For some reason, they decided to click like show a random blog, and they basically pulled up a pornographic site on Tripod.com, which was paired with a Ford ad, in which case then Ford was like, you guys get out of our office. I believe it was Ford, some auto company. So as a result, they were like, well, we need a way of disassociating our advertising with the content on the page. So some bright engineer was like, well, what if we made it in a new window so it's not part of that page anymore, and thus the pop-up ad was born. So again, the idea of like how advertising gets paired with user-generated content is the problem that's been going on since the beginning of the internet, because at some point we all decided this was a crossroads for the internet. It was, we either pay for it, we either figure out a way of funding sites that we like and we pay for it out of our own pockets, or we let advertising pay for it. And as sort of the parallel universe we're in is the one that advertising paid for it, and this is sort of the fallout that we have to deal with.
Is the future advertising more along the lines of like branded or partnered content, or do you think that there's something else?
Is the future of advertising more along the lines of branded or partner content? I think that's a good question. I think so. One thing that I think that's a really cool thing to think about is there's a theory that was around a while ago called The 1,000 True Fans. And this was in 2008 that this guy wrote it, which was, you can pull this up, I bookmarked this, take a look at this. But basically what he said was, if you're a single artist supporting yourself, you can support yourself off 1,000 fans, 1,000 true fans. And he defines a true fan as somebody who's willing to pony up $100 for whatever it is you're doing, be it music albums, be it live shows, be it whatever, over the course of 1 year. Because 1,000 people who are willing to pony up $100 means that you can make $100,000 a year, which is a nice, comfortable six-figure income, which you're pretty good no matter more or less where you are, unless you're in downtown San Francisco, in which case, good luck. But his point was, it's more about then, okay, don't worry about getting tons and tons of views on something. Worry about just getting 1,000 people to support what you do. That's more important. That 1,000 people is going to be way better than having the masses come along and trying to attract the masses. The difficulty is, I think, advertising fundamentally is about attracting the masses. When someone makes a car, when someone makes paper towels, they're not trying to be like, we can support our entire automotive industry off of 1,000 true Tesla fans. No, they need as many people as possible to reach it with that. So I think when it comes to broader content, when content that is whatever it is hitting at that moment, be it the algorithm is favorable to it or what have you, those are the places that you're going to see branded integrations. And I think that more and more, what we've seen is that we did a lot of brand integrations for a while, and I think people are actually shocked. And we were very open with what we considered a brand integration. We would put, even prior to sort of the FCC guidelines on what do you call a branded integration, we were very open with what we consider a brand integration. We would put a thing at the beginning. In the description, we'd say, this video sort of made possible by X brand. So sort of during VGHS, prior to the VGHS time. Oh boy, there's something. This is very hard to navigate. But I will just I'll just go through here. This was actually, I think this was a brand. Yes, Metal Gear was a brand deal. This was not a brand deal. Hitman was a brand deal. Far Cry Vacation was a brand deal. Old School New School brand deal. This was a brand deal. This is a brand deal. RC Chase brand deal. Army of Two, EA Break-In, Sandcastle Sensei. All of that group of videos, literally 80% of those are brand deals. Because for us, when we were doing these, it's like, cool, we have actual production costs. This is not us doing a vlog. We actually need that to physically be able to do what we want to do. We need to pay our crew. We need to be able to fund that in that way. And it's not just, for example, us going and showing the places. What they found, though, is at that time, you'll notice a lot of these Need for Speed, Greatest RC Car Chase, Old School News. So these are all video game companies that were paying for it. Video game companies found, as time has went on, that they get a much better return on investment by not having to pay a production cost for a video, but by just giving a bunch of copies away to people and letting them play it on their streams. And now people are seeing the video game and people are going out and buying it. They're seeing a much better return on that. So the way that those brand deals work has started to shift from, hey, we want to fund cool content, to either let's find situations where we get much better rates of return. In terms of in the world of video games, it's just putting it on Twitch streams and just letting that do its thing. PUBG, right, is basically sold off of how well it did on Twitch, right? It was word of mouth didn't get it there, word of Twitch got it there. And two, they just do it themselves. More and more, for example, car companies that we talk to, they would say, well, we could pay your production fee, or we could just make a bunch of videos for our Facebook, because they're interested now, and the world is flipped to where brands are thinking about how do we do things for ourselves, and how do we do it for our own Facebook. Like, I'd rather, if I have a Ford Focus, I'm going to just do it on the Ford Focus Facebook page and make a bunch of cool videos for that. They'd much rather deal with it on their own rather than ceding that to somebody else. So I think long story short is that the way brand integrations work, well, there'll always be the sort of halo effect of like celebrity endorsement or what have you, right? That's worked since radio times. Like, they would have various famous radio personalities would say like, I use this soap, and et cetera, and it worked. I think it will still continue to work for people who are of that ilk, of the sort of influencer ilk. I think that the way that they fund things are going to be more and more self-serving as time goes on. And I think that you're going to see more individual creators be able to just, again, reach out to their 100 true fans and subsist just off of that.
How important do you think consistency in upload time is? Do something weekly or monthly or whatever to start a channel? Is it important to focus on that, or to have everything you do be?
I think it's, one, you're always going to find that out by experimentation, because I think it's going to be different depending on the type of content that you do, right? So Primitive Technology, if we look at his upload schedule and we look at his pace, is very, very weird and very inconsistent. But as a result, And because it is unique in the way that it's unique, every time he puts a video up, it gets popped up on the front page of Reddit, right? And also because it's so inconsistent, he's been able to ride sort of the Reddit front page traffic help for a while because nobody's sick of it. I would say a good way to compare this is look at primitive technology. And anybody remember this guy? Do you remember how did you find this originally? Reddit. Who found it on Reddit? Who found it elsewhere? Who found it on Facebook? Wow, nobody found this on Facebook. Interesting. Most people, it looks like Reddit though, right? Or probably links from friends or something like that, but like they're probably getting it from Reddit. Do you remember when everyone was like, hey, let's stop putting these videos on the front page of videos because we're tired of it? And then all of a sudden, right, it changed, right? That changed their thing. Now granted, they're still doing very, very well, but the pace that they were getting back when they were just getting Reddit front page every single time they were putting it up, people got tired of it, right? So this is an example of by constantly doing it, people got kind of sick of seeing it over and over again. And at least from that, and again, that traffic source, they wore that out. So it really depends on the type of thing that you're doing, right? If it's the kind of thing that's quick and easily consumable, I mean, the easy way to look at that is look at what BuzzFeed's doing, right? Those are things that are coming on a very, very consistent basis. That's the kind of stuff that works for it. If it's more unique, I would argue this, the more unique you are, the more you can afford to not be super, super consistent with what you're doing. I think consistency helps because at the end of the day, people get into schedules, people understand, oh, I'm going to check on so-and-so a certain amount of time. I think a bare minimum of consistency is important to be able to maintain. So for example, like, I think that for us, it probably wouldn't have mattered that much, the difference between 1 a week or if we did 4 all at once at the end of the month. Because I think that, I think a lot of the viewing habits that we saw for how people were consuming our channel, this is prior to VGHS and like having a show, the way people were treating it was they were like, oh, I just come in like once a month and I watch all the things that you guys did that month, and I'll sit down for like 10 minutes or so and I'll just go through like 4 videos, and then next month if I remember I come back, right? So for that person, it doesn't really matter if they're not sitting there every single week waiting for it. And there's going to be a group of people who do that. There was also a big group of people who were like, cool, Thursdays is the day, and they're going to be sitting there on Thursday and waiting at 10 a.m. for that to come out. So it only helps you to be consistent. It can't hurt you at all, but in terms of being able to maintain channel strength and health, it is, I think, something that depends on the type of content that you're doing. So you're asking about promotion versus just making the content itself. Promotion's a tough cookie these days. So back when we were started, the way we looked at it was we were like, cool, gaming blogs, definitely. One of the things that we found was, I worked at 20th Century Fox making licensed video games for a little bit. One of the things that was interesting is that we found was that I would sit and I would surf Kotaku in the course of this job, and we would be like, cool, we're making a game, so apologies in advance. Aliens Isolation, not Isolation. What was the Gearbox one? Colonial Marines. Sorry. Story for another time for that one. But Colonial Marines, cool. We have art for it. That's a bunch of screenshots. Everyone blogged about that. Then we had a trailer. Everyone blogged about that. And then it was the release. So you really only had like 3 times over the course of the pre-production cycle that anything would sort of come out. So we're like, cool. So when we started making videos, we're like, hey, these gaming blogs are just thirsting for things to talk about because there's not that much stuff that's coming out of these games as they're in the middle of development. So we got a huge boost from the fact that we had video game ancillary, video game adjacent content, and a lot of our initial curve of success came from places that were like, cool, we want to talk about video games, but there's no more news for any given game that's coming out. So here's stuff that's adjacent to video games that we can justifiably talk about on our blog. So blog traffic was really important for us. Early on, we dig.com traffic was huge for us, right? Because we had a couple of videos pop off on dig.com shortly before dig.com imploded. So I think the problem with approaching things from a promotion first standpoint is that without any sort of notoriety or any sort of like name for yourself, it is a little bit like shouting into the void, right? The problem, right? It's like if a tweet comes out of account with fewer than 100 followers, does anybody ever read it, right? Like it's very hard to be self-promotional and have people follow it if they don't have a reason to actually go watch it. And I think that's always going to be the question when we're talking about viral content, when you're talking about stuff that you want to go broad appeal, you always have to ask yourself, what's the reason for somebody watching this? And 90% of the time, when people share videos, the reason the video goes viral is not because it's good. That is very important. There's not a meritocracy. Good videos die all the time. If that was true, if good videos actually got views, the most viewed videos in the world would be like Sundance award-winning shorts. It would be all 6 of the Oscar-nominated short films uploaded. Everyone would be like, you gotta see this amazing Harvard. No, nobody cares about that stuff. What drives people to view things is the question of the impulse of sharing. If you watch it and your first response is, I gotta show this to X, that's the most important emotional response that comes from video. And that can come in a lot of forms, right? For a while, the most viral video of all time was this guy. From just from a metric standpoint, this was one of the most viral videos of all time. This is a 30-minute long video. So here, what's crazy about this though, it's like, think about this for a second. Why was this viral? What about this? Like, you know, I get my favorite video of all time being viral, ski jump fail. I get why this dope 3-second video was viral. Hold on a second. No. Oh, please don't do. Okay, hold on. Like, I get it. Hold on. Unfortunately, there's no sound on this. There's a sound bit where he goes, ooh. You can hear him like very quietly in the background. I get why that's viral. So why did Coney 2012 go viral? Because they figured out a hack, which is this. They literally code into this video the following message. If you share this video, you are stopping a warlord. You're stopping a dictator, right? That was the thing. They're like, you need to spread awareness of this video by sharing this, by posting a like on Facebook. The world needs to know about this guy. So they rewarded you for the one thing that actually helps this video out. Most videos, it's, you know, right? Like even videos, right? Like, what was this one? Hold on one second. Was it Lights Out? Was it the short film? Huge short film. This one got 19 million views. Got a feature film made out of this. Nope, not the trailer. Not the trailer. This original short. Do you guys remember this? Has anyone seen this? Good short. Why did you share this video? It's because you're like, this is scary, you have to see it, right? It's not because you're like, the filmmaking here is incredible. No, it's like you want to show your friend this. You want to freak your friends out with it. The impulse to want to share something is what drives videos getting shared around beyond. So I think so don't worry so much about crafting beautifully written grammatical tweets about coming to see your thing. Worry about crafting videos that people want to share. That's going to do way more for you. Because again, I guarantee you that these guys, when they, you know, like in any given viral video of any of the moment, nobody is sitting there being like like for example, let's see, what was the BBC kid last year? This, I guarantee you the BBC didn't have a social media team being like, what are the tweets we need to craft for this to go viral? No, this is something that everyone's like, you have to see this. And that is much more powerful than any Twitter or Facebook post is ever going to be. Next question. Staying creative. So I think you have to always look at yourself. I think that as human beings, we're pretty good, I think, at understanding ourselves, and maybe not so good at understanding other people. It first starts with watching things, right? You have to be able to analytically look at how you're watching things. Don't just idly scroll through Facebook. If something as you're scrolling through Facebook catches your eye and you stop and you read it, ask yourself why. Like, what about it? Was it the thumbnail? Was it colorful in a certain way? What about it drew your attention to it over all the other crap on your timeline? It starts with being analytical in that sense. If you want to break it down, because if you're not, right, you're just going to let everything wash over you. But when you have that, you have the ability. Then I think you'll develop the ability to be like, okay, I can see how this formula works, right? Because again, clickbait everyone hates, but the reason why clickbait is because it works. If it didn't work, no one would use it, right? It works really well. So you have to ask yourself, what about it is causing you to stop and think like, oh, I do want to see what this is about, and I do want to stop and I want to watch this, right? I think that that's first and foremost. I think that's an important sense that you have to develop. And as far as getting the ideas, I think that you are going to be a snake eating its own tail if all you do is just look at like, hey, let's look at all these dope viral videos and just like, I'm gonna try and craft these viral videos. I'm gonna try and make clickbait titles. I'm gonna make videos like that. You get into a rabbit hole of just sort of making copies of things, right? And I think that in order to be creative beyond that, I think it's important that you do other things. So, go to museums, like go outside and hang out with your friends, like have a life experience that you can draw upon that you can bring into your situation, right? So like, for example, we did a video, so this was a video that a lot of people found us from. It was a video called Flower Warfare. I distinctly remember the moment of ideation for this video in particular, because we were sitting around and we were like, man, guns are cool, but they're really violent. And we were worried about, Brad and I were worried about we know that kids are starting to watch our stuff. We don't want to be like super duper violent. So what can we do? And then literally we're just like, well, what if we changed up the blood effect? Like, what if we change up the blood effect so that instead of blood, it was like something else, like maybe like powder or like flower petals. I'm like, well, flower petals is interesting. Okay, what if it was so blood hits would be flower petals, like rose petals, and then and then I guess like sunflowers have like the shape of a thing. Those could be the muzzle flashes. Okay, cool. Well, how would that make sense? Well, okay, what if it was like a story about two, and they're clearly kind of a little bit, maybe they're on something, and it's like kind of a psychedelic thing, and literally that was it. It wasn't like, that was the ideation for it. It was trying to solve a different problem entirely and coming to a creative solution for it. They're like, oh, okay, and then like one thing sort of followed another. Not everything is always like that, but ideas come from weird places, and you have to not be afraid to sort of chase down all the weird avenues and turns that they can take you down. Next question.
If you're not willing to shell out the money for Adobe when you're just starting, what are some good editing programs?
Editing programs that are free. Shoot, hold on. Oh, shoot, you guys saw that. Open source, hold on, sorry. There is an open source editing software. Does anyone know what this is? I forget what it's called. OpenShot, OBS. OBS is more live stuff. HitFilm Express is pretty good too. Resolve is free? That's right. Yeah, DaVinci Resolve is a free version that is it's basically DaVinci Resolve to edit would be like using using a jackhammer to screw in your remote control. Yeah, that's right. So Blackmagic software has DaVinci, which is a color correction program, but also you can do editing on it. DaVinci is like the top tier color correction program. So if you do want to get into color correction, boy oh boy, you're all set. But it also has an editing side of it. I would search around for it. For a while we were doing like free trials of stuff and just like reinstalling Windows every time and just starting the free trial again. HitFilm has a couple examples of that. But yes, absolutely use whatever you can, and then when you can afford it, go for it. Yeah. Question. Yeah, so the question is Vimeo and whether or not as a viable platform. The way I see it, it's like, why not, right? But I would put it this way: if your goal on Vimeo is to try and get ad money and to try and get tons of views on it, not as likely, right? But if you look at the people who are doing things on Vimeo, they're supporting themselves from a financial standpoint, supporting themselves off of Patreon, right? Most Vimeo's like pay for video thing and the on-demand stuff is not quite as sort of worthwhile, and I don't think as effective. But at the end of the day, if it's like the way that we look at it, the way that I look at it, if I was starting now, it would be, I would post any given video I do, I would post it to every place I could, right? Twitter, Facebook, if it's short enough, Twitter, Facebook, Vimeo, YouTube, and then just see what happens, right? If it happens to catch an audience on Vimeo, then cool. If I'm blowing up on Facebook and it's not worth it to do YouTube, cool. The only way that you're really going to know is to put it in as many places as possible. Follow up. Mm. Mm. Right, right, right. Yeah, I mean, by the way, small point for your contracts. If you're going to be ever dealing with music or whatever on YouTube, make sure you carve out in your paperwork that you have the ability to upload on your channel, et cetera, so that if you do get a copyright strike, so the way the copyright strike thing program works, everyone gets mad about DMCA stuff like that. Unfortunately, it is the law of the land as set during like the Clinton administration. That's just the way you have to deal with it. So what you have to do, so for those of you who are dealing with copyright stuff, if a strike is given to a piece of content, the content holder is obligated to take it down. They can't be like, well, that's wrong, and not listen to that. So you can arbitrarily put a fake copyright strike on stuff, and and YouTube has to take it down according to the law of the land. It is then on you to come back and say, no, I do have the rights for this, and here I am submitting my information. Here's my address, and if they want to sue me, they can come at me. Then they will put it back up. But that's the way the law is written. That's the process and the back and forth that they have to do for it. So just keep that in mind whenever you're doing stuff. If you're ever going to be dealing with music, if you ever deal with copyright stuff, make sure that you are legally in the clear.
With something like VGHS, how did you see the income difference between a service like Netflix, a curated streaming service, and when you were releasing on YouTube? What's the most?
So VGHS, if you were just, so again, VGHS was pretty early in terms of the advertising, like pre-roll ads and things like that, so it's not going to be necessarily the same as it is right now. Moreover, Netflix and the way they deal with those licensing fees is not going to be the same as it is right now. They are much, much stingier because Netflix's goal is not to just license a bunch of stuff. They want to make it themselves, right? Because they see the tide coming as far as Disney pulling out all of their content. Fox is going to now pull out all their content. They're like, cool, eventually all of our competitors are going to be like, why are we licensing to you? We're going to put it on our own Fox streaming service or Disney streaming service. So they are now more about paying for it as a Netflix original because then they own it and they can do whatever they need with it. From that standpoint, the advertising was a paltry amount. Like we would be unable to support VGHS off of just the advertising alone, which is why it was a combination of Patreon. Kickstarter. It was a combination of brand deals. So season 2, like we had a whole car racing stuff in. It was Dodge Dart came in and they chipped money into it. So there's that. The way that those got made was a whole smorgasbord of doing things. But for the most part, advertising is always the smallest sort of piece of that pie. Have time for a couple more here. See, the thing is, I don't think any video hosting social medias, in Vine, dang. Rest in peace, Vine. Well, here's the thing, right? Like, I don't think that, like, everyone's like, I think it's tough. I don't think YouTube is ever going to disappear because I think YouTube represents a new genre of site. So it's like, it's not like, it's the way I see it, and YouTube is weird because there's so much bandwidth cost. The only people that could potentially fight them is Amazon because of the hosting sort of side of it. Like, but a site to put your vacation videos up for free, I think is going to be a thing at all times, right? Like, I think the smaller ones have much more risk of dying out. Your streamables and your what have yous are, if there's no finance model sort of in place for it. But I don't think that, like, for example, YouTube is like, it's the end of YouTube. It's like, nah, YouTube really gets way more money off of, right? Like, I think that everyone forgets, like, you watch the content creators and they make the most sort of noise, but the aggregate of those 48 hours a second being paired with Coca-Cola ads is making YouTube as a company way more money than someone posting up a video every day even, right? So that more or less my thoughts on it. Two more. It's, again, being creative is about not getting stuck. Don't get stuck looking at a page. Go outside. Let your brain take a break. Brain can't just like crank on one thing all the time is sort of the way that I've always felt it. Take a walk, bike ride, try different art. Like, take up different types of art. Even there's weird things. Take up painting. Why not? You might figure out something there that you're like, oh, this is an interesting thing. You'll find solutions for it. Right? I think a lot of times creativity comes from pairing up weird ideas and picking them in your brain and putting them together. So have more ideas that you can draw upon.
Do I remember correctly that you got a deal with Lionsgate?
Yeah, so we had a first look deal with them a few years ago.
Are you still with them, or is that
That's still it's running. Hold on, is anyone recording this? Nobody's recording this, right? Twitch is? Is this being twitched? Ah, cool. All right, I'll talk to you afterwards. It's like you're getting into business stuff. I can't talk about that stuff in public. Last question. Last question. Back in the corner there. What do you mean by that? Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. I don't think so. Now here's why. This is like the biggest lesson. The last 60 seconds, the biggest lesson that we learned in the last few years was we did a horror short for Halloween because we like we like filmmaking. We're filmmakers, so this is a black and white horror short. People were like okay on it, but the interesting thing about it was someone used this analogy for how they reacted to it. They said, it's not that this was a bad short. I liked it. It's just that it's like I was listening to jazz on my Rhapsody channel and rock and roll came on. But that is very important because it means that they don't look at you and they don't look at you as a creator as Tarantino or Spielberg as a director. They're not like, I'm here for Wes Anderson's next movie. They're here because they look at people in general, they treat YouTube as a service, and I'm here to get this thing, and you're here on our channel to get X, and I'm going to this guy because he draws things, and they're like, I'm trying to I'm inferring based on this. He does video game stuff, right? Like, that's what you're there for. You're not treating this as an artist. You're treating it as a service. And I'm going to the hydraulic press channel for this, and I'm going for primitive technology because I want to see him build stuff. I'm not here for other things because I'm here for the end result of that content. Very few people so far have been able to kind of go beyond that. We've always tried to do that, but for the most part, you're always going to have some degree of segmentation for it. That, I'm afraid, is all the time we have left. We'll take some questions. Like if you have any, I'll talk to you about the stuff here in the corner in a little bit. But thank you everybody for coming. Hope you have a good MAGFest.